Hi there, my name is Nathan and this is The Human Experience, and today I want to talk about things in life that have given me a deeper understanding. And I want to start with two stories that have given me a better understanding, and in a way that my life has kind of had some parallels with. And that is the story of Buddha and the story of Forrest Gump. And for those that don't know, to break down and simplify the story of Buddha, it's that the Buddha started off as a prince, and he was the son of the king, and he lived in this palace. And his father loved him so much that he didn't want him to experience any unhappiness. And that led him to live a life of, abundance and, good living. And one day, this prince, this boy, he decided that he wanted to see things outside of the palace walls. And when he actually went out there, he came across four people that kind of embodied things that humans actually face in their lives. And that was suffering, sickness, aging, and death. And in meeting these four people, which kind of embodied these qualities or these experiences, he got to learn about life and had a quest to kind of figure out, maybe not a cure, but like the reason why these things were happening. And he wanted to be amongst the people. So he sought out that journey to be in that environment from being in the totally opposite environment before. And I think the way that parallels with Forrest Gump is, it's not that he's necessarily seeking it, but because in the story Forrest Gump is, has quite a low IQ and is quite childlike in his mannerisms, and that he's quite innocent, and that he goes about these tasks and these accomplishments without necessarily aiming to do them. He just kind of does them. It kind of shows that throughout his life, he's trying lots of different things, whether it's excelling at playing American football, becoming a hero in the war, or just doing this endless marathon run that he does, that he's kind of finding maybe a peace in life through the experiences that he has. And the way I think that paralleled my life is, when I look back now, coming to my late 30s, I realized that unknowingly I've kind of been seeking out certain experiences just to have a better understanding of what's going on around us and find meaning in things. And that was mainly through my work. And I feel that's how society operates now. Like, you have a passion or a purpose through the work that you do normally. And that obviously creates an income generally that then you can live off, as well as doing the job that you do. So yeah, starting with the jobs that I would do, I often did things that I wasn't really thinking about the paycheck. Yes, that was part of the whole, getting the job and doing it for that reason, to survive. But part of it for me was almost, what was I going to get out of the work? And what I started off doing out of college was I became a TA, which is a teaching assistant, a classroom assistant. And I was working with special educational needs, so learning difficulty kids and also behavioural difficulty kids. And that gave me a great insight into how everyday kind of things that we take for granted, like learning and understanding, can be very, very difficult for other people. And that just to make smaller steps in doing stuff can be a big leap for them. So for me, it was about making that work accessible. And one particular incident that gave me a kind of better understanding of where these kids were coming from was, there was a brilliant science teacher, and she put on this lesson where she was trying to explain, I believe, like the food chain, and how you have the apex predator and then you have the prey beneath that. The way she did this was that the class had a pet snake, And what she did is she'd got this mouse. She had them in the freezer to feed the snake every now and again. And she fed, once she'd thawed out the mouse and warmed it up, she fed the mouse to the snake in front of the kids. Which, for me, the reason it was impactful is I could see on their faces that, you know, things were happening within their mind to understand that some animals eat other animals, and that's the way the cycle of kind of life and death plays out in nature. It was just a different way. You know, when you look more in the mainstream schools, yes, there are certain practical things teachers do, especially in science, but a lot of it was textbooks when I was growing up and just listening and writing things down. And I just loved that practical element that the teacher had brought to the lesson to really help them kids better understand what she was talking about and that concept. So yeah, that was very insightful working as a TA. So yeah, after being a TA, I also worked in a bar, and that gave me great insights into how people behave when they're drunk and when they're in a kind of relaxed environment and they let go of their inhibitions. And I've seen a lot of things from, like, you know, people connecting and probably, you know, going on dates and stuff like that, to, you know, altercations, arguments, people getting upset, all kinds of things, people having the time of their life, like a night to remember. And that was very insightful to say that I seen human emotions in a kind of heightened place because of normally the influence of alcohol, but not just that, music and being, like I say, in a relaxing, fun environment. But one story that hits me, that was actually when I was working behind the bar in Nottingham, was the manager that had hired me. He was into diving. Basically, one weekend he had gone diving and he had got into some difficulties under the water and they had to bring him up. And sadly, he'd passed away. And I think it was later put down to a cardiac arrest, but he'd also experienced the bends, which is something that when divers, I understand, looking into it after that, when divers come up from quite a depth, the pressure is different down below to up top. So there's more pressure down below, and the higher up you get to the normalized pressure of being out of the water. Yeah, the bends basically kind of poisons your body through the way that your body reacts to that decompression coming up to the surface. And if you do it too quick, then yeah, it can be life-threatening. That, along with him having some kind of cardiac event, whether that caused it, was the reason he passed away. And the most hard-hitting thing was working in that club and being in that environment. We knew the other people within that industry, within that city, and basically that manager, his wife, worked in another club. She managed another club, but she was pregnant with my manager's child, and obviously that's what made it so sad. That, you know, I was quite young, so I didn't fully understand what life was about then, but it was like, this guy will never get to see his unborn child, and his partner, as well as having the grief of the loss of him, will also experience bringing up a child by herself. And, you know, one day it was playing in my mind that she'll have to explain what happened to the kid's dad. Yeah, which was so, you know, terrible, and just showed that life can be so unpredictable and so tragic in some cases. So that was a lesson in that job that I learned. I then moved on to, I was always seeking like that kind of relationship that people have with each other in the world. So I went on to work in the prison service. Obviously, you could say as society, we kind of shun those that are incarcerated as criminals, and that they should be locked up, and that they're kind of the people that just don't fit into society's norms. And I learned a few things in the prison. One, that even if you are incarcerated, you might not necessarily be an out-and-out criminal, and that there's always a story behind everyone that has been locked up, and there might be a reason why they have got to that point that they've got to. And one of the most kind of tragic ones I heard was of a lad. He was only about 18, 19, and he was in for arson. I became his personal officer, so I got to speak to him and I got to see his file. And you could tell he was very troubled anyway without knowing all this stuff. But what I come to realize in the end is the reason he had carried out that arson was he had actually tried to set fire to his house when his stepdad was in it and his mum was out. And that was because his stepdad was being abusive to his mum, and he just didn't want that to go on anymore, and he didn't know how to deal with it. Now, I understood I was only hearing his side of the story, and the file read pretty much like what had happened, but obviously in the eyes of the law, it's wrong to commit arson. And as well as sympathising with him, I could understand that he maybe could have found a better way to go about it, but maybe he didn't understand at that age again and in them circumstances. So yeah, he was locked up for a long amount of time. Yeah, it could be seen as unfair, yeah? And that if we really broke down the story and that was true what he was saying, then maybe there was another way for society to deal with that situation other than just locking him up for a long time and get to the bottom of it. Also, on the flip side, working as a prison officer, I got to see and understand what my colleagues were going through, and that life wasn't always rosy. Just because we were on the other side of the bars, as they say, and was able to go home every day and had our freedom, that there was trouble going on there. And there was one incident where it was an officer that I didn't know too well because he worked on the other side of the prison mainly, but he'd basically taken his own life when not at work. It was a massive shock, obviously, to all of the prison staff and also to some of the prisoners, because they knew this officer quite well. And when overhearing some of the conversations with the prisoners and speaking to some of the staff myself, you know, people just couldn't understand, especially the prisoners, why he'd taken his life. He had his freedom, he had a good job. Why would he do that? And I knew he had a lot of personal things going on in his life, and I feel maybe that sadly was the only thing he felt he could do to escape what was going on, and he couldn't take no more. And whether you're locked in jail or seem to be having a good life, you know, that's not always the case for the individual on the inside. Internally, a lot of other things can be going on. So that was something I learned working in the prisons. So after working in the prisons, I worked for the ambulance service, and I started off in patient transport, and I would take people sometimes to hospices if they were terminally ill, or I would take people to their appointments, or I would take people to the renal unit sometimes. And that was a place they went if they'd had kidney failure, then they needed to go on this machine in the renal unit to get dialysis, and therefore that would filter their blood because their kidneys were either failing or had failed. And this was a thing that the patients had to do every other day, and they had to be on this dialysis machine for like 4 or 5 hours sometimes, and it had a major impact on their life. It almost put it on hold, because every other day they had to come to this hospital. So it affected their work, their relationships, what they could even do in their lives, even their eating habits. You know, they had a strict diet because of what was going on inside their body and the way it processed it. And that just made me really think about how lucky I was to have my health, and that, you know, the suffering that other people can go through, which related to the story of Buddha, obviously. It was uncontrollable in a sense. The only thing, the hope that these people had was that they would get a transplant. And obviously, with organ donation being quite low relative to the demand for it, that time scale could be years and years if they ever got a match. And obviously their health could always deteriorate in that time. And therefore, you know, the worst case, they pass away before they have an opportunity to get a transplant. Then I went on to work for the emergency side of the ambulance service, and I was, you know, responding to 999 calls and more critical care stuff. And that was more immediate. I was seeing, like, you know, people pass away in front of me and in front of their loved ones at accidents or during cardiac arrests. And yeah, that for me was quite troubling. It was quite traumatic for myself, because I feel I could empathise with the family and with that person, but it was just seeing it in real time, you know, it was quite shocking. One of the most troubling incidents actually wasn't to do with death, it was more of the ageing aspect, and that was, there was a man, we'd been called out to him, I think he'd had a fall. When we got there, what we'd realised is he'd got up, he basically had carers throughout the day. He was an elderly man in his 80s, I believe, and he'd got up to go to the toilet for himself. The last carer call had already been, so he was on his own for the rest of that night. So in falling, he had to alert us with one of his, I think he had a pendant, or he had some kind of alarm in his house that he could alert someone, and then they rang for the ambulance. But what we did then is help him into bed, and then left him in his house, and we secured his property and stuff like that. But in speaking to him during the time of getting him up and making sure he was okay and doing his obs, we got to understand that he was widowed. He was really feeling lonely, and like life wasn't really worth living. And I could totally understand that. What I mean? He lost his partner. I think his kids were living quite far away, so they couldn't help out. And yeah, he had these carers coming in, but he just felt so lonely in life, and so like he was a burden almost to the society, to these services that he was using, to his family. Yeah, like I say, that really hit me, that one day you could be unable to help yourself, to even get up off the floor, to even get into bed. That the life day to day was very isolated, and there was not a lot going on, and you were literally just existing, which is it's very hard hitting, it's very sad. But it was another lesson for me on this could happen to anyone. This anyone could get old and frail and be in this predicament, and that was part of life. So I say all these things to say that there are always lessons to be learned in life. Sometimes it can be from your own experiences, sometimes it can be others around you. And for me, I was just very curious, and unknowingly I kind of seeked out these moments throughout my life, and have come to a kind of conclusion that basically we have no control over these things happening. And through that, it kind of gives me a piece of like, these things are going to unfold. It's really how we deal with them, and it's our perception and our perspective on them that lead us to either take action or kind of sit with them and kind of let them affect us. It's how we think about them and how we react, and the energy we put into these things. And it can be either for the betterment of ourselves, or it can be for a detriment to ourselves. All we can do as an individual or as a group is try and make the best of a situation. A lot of the times on the ambulance service, if we were going to a critical call, there was a couple of outcomes. They were either going to die, have life-changing kind of health implications, or they were going to make a full recovery. So that led me to believe that, whatever actions you take, there's always hope that you can get to the best case scenario. And for yourself in life, that you must always persist, always have this hope, and that can kind of motivate you to make the most of each day, be that an easy day or a hard day, or a day of suffering or a day of joy. It's just how you look at it, how you perceive it. Yeah, that's all we've got time for on the human experience. I would love to see some comments below about what has impacted your life, or what you have witnessed that has impacted your life, and what kind of impact it had, and how it changed your perspective on things. It could be a film, it could be a personal story, it could be something you read about, it could be something, like I say, that you've actually been there and witnessed. So yeah, thanks for your time, guys, and I'll see you next time on The Human Experience.